for those of you that are unaware, my name is Gwen Mayer, and I'm the archivist at the Hudson Library and Historical Society, and we want to say good morning to you. This morning, we are wonderfully excited to host Suzanne Russo Adams, so we'll give it a few minutes before we get started. The Genealogy Group President, Beth Martin, is here as well, so she can have a quick conversation or with you at the end if you need to. We're just waiting for people to file into the room before we get started, so be patient with us. Many of you know that if you want to ask a question, you can put you can type your questions into the Q&A box or the chat box. We prefer the Q&A box, but either will work. Suzanne has agreed to take questions at the end, so feel free to ask your question. I think we're just about ready to get started. So as I said, my name is Gwen Mayer, and I'm the archivist at the Hudson Library and Historical Society. And we're delighted to have Suzanne Russo Adams with us this morning. She is going to speak about doing Italian genealogical research. She is clearly an expert in the area. She works for Family Search, among other things, and she's well known for writing articles and publishing about Italian research. I think she's done a book or two as well. So without further ado, I'm going to pivot to Utah and say good morning to Suzanne Russo Adams for getting up for us early this morning.
Good morning.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Good morning. Thanks, Gwen. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can share my screen here. Let's see here. Get the right one. Are you seeing my PowerPoint?
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to see if we can go full screen on it. Are we good there?
I think we're getting there. There.
Okay. Does that show full screen for you?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, again, thanks, Gwen, for that introduction. I'm super excited to be here to talk to you about Italian research. It's one of my passions, one of my loves. I do work for Family Search, so I had the opportunity to work with our Italian record acquisition and acquisition of records throughout the world. So in some of the diaspora areas where Italians went to. So I have responsibilities for record strategy and acquisition in South America South, which is Brazil and Argentina. And I also span the globe to the Pacific and the United States and parts of Europe. So I'm blessed to be able to work in lots of different areas of the world. But Italian is one of my passions. My father's family all comes from Italy, and so that's mainly why it's one of my passions in that way. And you can see my grandmother behind me. She's always got my back. So that's my Italian nonna. So with that, I'm gonna just start. I named this Tesoro, which means treasure. And so you can see my little treasure box there. If we were in person, I'd probably bring you all some of these chocolates, but they're some of my favorites. Anyway, so I want to just say that researching Italian ancestors really can be a treasure trove. The records are amazing. It's just an amazing place with a lot of history. And so I'm going to give you kind of the nutshell version of Italian history as it relates to genealogy. Of course, this could be courses and courses worth of material. But Italy, we think of, now as its modern boundaries, but historically it was a nation of city-states, which meant that each sort of city had its own ruling body, or certain areas of Italy were ruled by different monarchs. And it was only really unified as a nation between 1859 and 1871. And the population at that time, right after unification in 1881, was about 29 million. And then you start to see this huge influx after Italy was outflux, I should say, of people leaving Italy. And so historians have estimated that between 1880 and 1915, 13 million Italians left. And so that the census, the national census that was taken in 1901, estimated that there was some serious loss, especially from southern Italy. And so I'll talk a little bit about that more. So Italy is really kind of a new construct, the way that it's put together. So why did they leave? A lot of different reasons, and we know this from our ancestors and leaving Europe and going different places. But poverty was really one really big reason. There were some taxes that were being implemented on the South that caused many people to leave, and they weren't able to make a lot of money. The South was more agrarian than the North. The North had more in the way of textiles and economy and things like that. But the South was very, very arable, and there was a lot of farming going on in that area, and it made it really difficult for people. And so there was a lot of migration. Oftentimes, though, for Italy, we have some chain migration and return migration, meaning that many of the people, even from the South, who weren't making a lot of money, intended to go to America or other places, and they actually called it fare la America, or to do America, rather than, even if they went to Australia or Europe, that was kind of the phrase. In fact, I had a friend in college, he was from Sicily, and he said, yeah, my grandfather actually went to America, worked on the railroads, and then returned home. And the big thing was to make money and be able to go back and buy land. So there was a lot of back and forth between America and Italy. And in fact, in my own family, I have uncles who came in the 1950s and the 1960s. And one of my uncles comes from the very same town where my family came from in the early 1900s. And so there's, especially with that town in Italy, there's a lot of back and forth. And I would see people, I grew up in California, I would see people in California at the family reunions that I saw when I went to Italy. And so there was just a really, really strong tie between those towns, because people were going back and forth, and still do today. So this kind of shows, this map is from a book called Immigrant Nation, The Making of Italy Abroad by Mark Choate. He's a BYU professor. And this map, I think, is a really good illustration between 1906 and 1911 of the massive amount of people that came from the South. And so a lot of people that came to the US from Italy were from Southern Italy, approximately 70 to 80%. And so generally Southerners were coming after about 1900. That's kind of that's a sort of a, not a hard fast rule, but if you have Italians who are coming to the United States prior to 1900, it's likely that they're coming more from northern provinces or northern regions or areas of Italy. If they're coming after 1900, higher likelihood that they're coming from somewhere in the South. And the major ports of embarkation from Italy were Genoa in the north, Naples sort of in the below middle, and then Palermo, which is the island of Sicily. Those were the major ports that people were coming from. There are no passenger lists from Italy or in Italy, no passenger list and no real passport information survives in Italy. So what we have is passenger lists coming into the United States or into Canada or Argentina or wherever your ancestor immigrated or migrated to. So this kind of shows you.
I'm sorry, Suzanne, I'm sorry to interrupt. We have a few people in the Q&A box regarding your presentation style.
Yes.
Is there a way we can remove the presenter notes? We're seeing the presenter notes in the
are
next
you
slide
really?
preview.
Okay, yes. That's why I was wondering if you were seeing that or if you were, there we go. Okay.
There we go, thank you.
That's why I was asking if you could see it full screen before. Yeah, because we don't need the presenter notes. Sorry about that. Yeah, is that better?
Much.
The display was not doing what we needed it to do. Okay. Yeah, no more presenter notes. We don't need that. Okay, so the Italian diaspora, this kind of shows worldwide. This is from an article on familysearch.org blog. This graphic is. So you can see these are the major places where Italians went, and those are the current numbers. So in North America, between United States and Canada, 18, 19 million Italians or people with of Italian descent. But in South America, you can see that there's actually a lot more, 54.4 million, and mainly in Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil. Those are the major places where people went. And these are the time periods where they went. And something interesting about Brazil, I'll just point out Brazil real quick here, is a lot of Brazil was one of the last nations to outlaw slavery. And I think that that emancipation was in 1888 there. Italians, after unification, started to migrate, and many went to Brazil during that time period. But the Italian government noticed that they were being actually enslaved, or post-enslavement, and so it stopped Italians from going into Brazil in the early 1900s, in 1900 1901. So then you have a lot slower of a group going, that, but a huge bulk of people went to Brazil during that earlier time period. And that's why you also see a shift in where people are going. They start to go to the United States in bigger numbers after that, because the government had assurances from the United States and from other areas that their people wouldn't be enslaved, so to speak. Okay. So where do you go to find out more about your Italian ancestors? I'm going to say, first you're going to start at home. And because Italians are a more recent migrant group, I would say, some of that information about what you need to actually find your family may be just in what you have at home. When I first began researching my Italian ancestors more than 20 years ago, I had to do little more than go and ask my grandparents, where are your parents from? And for me, I was lucky. And like I said, we have close ties to family still in Italy. For others, it may not be as easy, but you may find that there are things around the house, or with how much is on the internet and accessibility in libraries and archives to records, it's a little bit easier. One, because it's a more recent immigrant group, and two, because the records just start getting better. I think we know that after 1900, especially in the United States, we have better censuses. States start keeping better vital records and adding more information. We have 1906, the naturalizations were federalized, so we have better information on our naturalization documents. We also have, and you'll notice a few things that are maybe a little bit different with Italian research, is alien registration. So I mentioned that some Italians didn't intend to stay. And so that meant if they were still in the United States in the 1940s, that they may have been considered an enemy alien and have just a plethora more records. And so how do you tell that? You would look at a census, and if your ancestors have that AL next to their name, this is the 1940 census, and especially in 1940, if they still have not naturalized or have not done any of the beginning work to naturalize, they could have an alien registration card at home, or what's called an AR2 form that can be requested from NARA and actually from USCIS. But I was lucky enough to just know that none of my people naturalized. And so this is my great-grandfather's alien registration card that my uncle had and allowed me to make a copy of. So these are documents that you may find with your Italian ancestors. And this is really anyone who was not a citizen of the United States during World War II. So it wasn't just Italians, Germans, Japanese. It was really anyone. So it's records of alien residing in or entering the US during that time period of 1940 to 1944. And these are not, you may have heard of A files. They're not A files. The alien registration forms that are filled out are different from that, but it's an actual 5 to 7 page form that was filled out that can be requested from the National Archives. It's age 14 and older that had to fill these out. And again, everyone, not just those from specific enemy nations during World War II. So I want to switch a little bit and talk about naming patterns, because I'm going to talk a little bit about what you would do in the US to figure out where your family's from if they don't just automatically know. And with that comes a few things about names and naming, and the way that you may be able to use names to be able to discover that locality in Italy. So there are some specific naming patterns for Italians. It's not always a hard and fast rule, but it's pretty close. So the naming pattern, and this is in other nations as well, The first son is usually named after the paternal grandfather, first daughter after that paternal grandmother, the second son after a maternal grandfather, and the second daughter after the maternal grandmother. That means you have kind of this big fat Greek wedding thing happening. And if you've seen that movie, everybody's sort of named the same thing. I have that in my own family. My grandfather's name is Natale, and I have three cousins, excuse me, that are named Natale after my grandfather. My father's name is also Natale, and they all go by something different. So we have Nat, Charlie, Tony. They go by their middle names, or they go by their first names. But if a child in Italy died, they would then name that next child after that grandparent as well. So you can see kind of my graphic on the screen where it shows 2 Carmelo Calandras and 3 Francescas. And so if you stop in your research or ignore that fact, you may be missing a lot. And this speaks to, you really need to research the entire family and not just your direct lines, because not only could you have multiple children being named the same thing in a family, you can also have cousins that are named the same thing. So you really have to expand your research when doing Italian research. In this particular example, my great-grandmother is the 3rd Francesca that we're seeing on the screen. There were 2 other Francescas that were born before her. Male names usually end in an O, female names in an A. It's a typical thing. There are a few names that stray beyond that, but there are some name lists and things like that you can look at. It can give you better ideas. Name changes did happen when people came to the United States. More so with the first name. My grandfather was a Matteo, but I find him on records as Matt, Matteo, Mike, Martin. It just depends on how good they spoke English and whether or not they'd been given sort of a nickname or something similar to their Italian name. Surnames are really interesting in Italy. Italy is one of the places in the world that has sort of the most surnames. There are 350,000 some odd surnames in Italy. So what's amazing and nice about those surnames, though, are they follow certain patterns. So we have patronymics in some areas with surnames, geographical areas, descriptive names, occupation. They came from animals, insects, birds, and things like that. Surnames in Italy didn't begin until probably, early 1400s, 1400s to mid 1400s. And then after the Council of Trent and things like that, you start to get more people that have surnames because the Catholic Church is recording baptisms, marriages, and burials, and those sacraments. And so there's a link to the blog article that I've written that will give you lots more information about first names and surnames in Italy, and talk a little bit more about some of the websites that you could go to. In some countries, we're lucky to have these sort of surname maps that tell you where a person is potentially from. So this is just an example for a surname I was helping somebody find. And this is oftentimes one of the very first things I do if somebody tells me their Italian surname. This is my Italian surname. I plug it into one or all of these websites that are in your syllabus material just to kind of get a sense of where the family might be from. So for this particular name, Micozzi, you can see that it is just lighting up that middle area in Lazio, in that area. So there's a website that shows you on a map kind of where people lived. And these are taken from white pages, from more modern data, not from historical records. But they're still a really, really good indication, especially if you have a super uncommon name. Now, my maiden name, Russo, would just completely light up that map. It's sort of like Brown or Smith in Italy. The only other more common name in Italy is Rossi. But if you have a less common name, you can plug that into that map. You can kind of see where it's at. This other website that I'm showing you allows you to search by region. So if we click on, in Lazio, in that region of Italy, then we get this that comes up, and it actually gives you the propensity of surnames by the towns. And so if you have even a more common surname paired with an uncommon surname, and you match those, throw those into a spreadsheet and look at kind of where they're matching up. If you have a married couple in the US whose surnames are sort of, you know, matching in the same town or area, then you without anything else have sort of an area where you might be able to look. Now, we're not just going to use the surnames to figure out where our families are from in Italy, but in Italy, it's one tool in the toolbox that you can use to figure out where somebody may be coming from. So I wanted to give you kind of just a brief case study about locating the place of origin in Italy. This is a tangential line to mine that I didn't know where they were from in Italy. This is Aunt Vita and Uncle John. Uncle John's my grandmother's brother. He's the baby in the family. But Vita, we're gonna focus on the Pisciotas. So all I knew about Aunt Vita's family was her parents' names, and from censuses and from family information that he was born in Italy about 1892. He died in 1945 in St. Louis, Missouri. And that's all the information I had to start with. So what do? I, of course, want to go and do my due diligence in the records in the United States, because that's where they lived. And so, like I said before, censuses give us a lot of really great information, especially after 1900. So you start to get into, you know, 1910, 1920, 1930, where you have naturalization status, year of naturalization, year of when they came to the United States, you know, the year of immigration, and a lot of other clues on there. So if we take for this family the 19, and I am a big fan of timelines. Some of you out there may love timelines too. I don't know if you love them as much as I do, but I love to make timelines because I think they pull things out. As you analyze records, they reveal a lot. And so this is just a sort of a brief timeline for 1920, 1930, and 1940 of this family. We see Vito, who's our primary target, because his wife did not come from Italy. He was the one that came from Italy. She was born in Missouri. You can see that on the census. It's a little bit tiny. But he was 27 years old in 1920, says that he immigrated in 1910, and that at that time he was an alien. From Italy, he's a barber living in St. Louis. And so 1930, same thing. He's about 10 years older, immigrated in 1910. We're not quite sure. It says PA or NA. It was a little difficult to read. From Italy, he was 22 at his first marriage, and he's a barber, and he's living in Missouri. In 1940, same thing. Italy, he's from Italy. His naturalization status is either PA or NA. It's not the AL anymore. So we know that we can start to look for some information about potential naturalization. Maybe he started the process but never finished it. So if I expand that out and I look at a lot of different records, this is sort of what we end up seeing, that he was born in Italy. I do find a declaration of intent to naturalize in Missouri, and it gives us an exact place, or it gives us a place of a location, and it gives us an exact date of birth. And as I follow him, World War I draft, on his World War I draft card, we're getting the same birth date, born in Italy. We have that he declared his first papers. He's a barber, so we can kind of figure that we have that same guy that we've been seeing with all of the family together. His declaration of intent actually tells us that he arrived in June of 1906. So then I went back and got that passenger list. It says he's from Campobello and his father is Vincenzo and he's going to Brooklyn. So not going to St. Louis, but that's okay. We oftentimes know that people, you know, came into New York, maybe stayed there and then moved on west. And then his World War II draft gives us that same birth date and tells us Campobello, Trapani, Italy. And then, of course, his death certificate gives us his parents' names. We don't always get that on death certificates, but we're lucky here. And then we get Campello. So just in a few, and then again, a newspaper obituary. So I've kind of hit the highlights in terms of US research. I found a declaration of intent. I found his passenger list. I found a World War I draft, a World War II draft, his death certificate, and an obituary, along with those censuses. And right now we're already seeing some really good patterns here, and even telling us, you know, where he's from. I will mention one thing passenger lists were filled out at the port of embarkation before people left. And so they were filled out in Italy. So if you are struggling with the surname of an Italian ancestor, if you can find them on the passenger list, that is most likely what their name will be spelled like in Italy. And so that's the closest spelling. So if they've kind of changed their name over time, or if it was changed by record keepers or whoever wrote the records, those passenger lists are sort of crucial. And even the naturalization documents to figuring out how exactly that name was spelled in Italy, because you're going to need that when you go over to Italy to do that research. The other thing that I will say is that women, even if married, on passenger lists will travel under their maiden name. So you will find a mother with her maiden name, and if she's traveling with her children separate and apart from her husband, the children will be listed under the father's surname, and she will be listed under her maiden name. And this sort of carries over into the United States, where a man, even on a World War I draft record, when he was giving his wife's name, would give her maiden name. So you may get maiden names on other documents in the United States because women retain their maiden name in Italy. So here's just a few of those documents that I was able to find. Was there a question? In the United States, where a man, even United States, because women retain their maiden name in Italy. Yeah. So sorry. Here's just a few of those. Oh, I'm hearing some feedback. I think I'm hearing myself. Okay. So from those documents, I go to Google. That's one of the first places that I go to figure out, or look to see where a place might be in Italy. And before the first slide, I mentioned Italy was a nation of city-states. People tended to, because of that, and because Italy was just unified, they tended to identify with their town or their province or their region. And I'll talk about those in a minute, more so than they did with Italy. So you'll see Italy on documents, but oftentimes an Italian will try to tell you exactly, they'll try to tell you exactly where they're from. So I use Google, and then I use another site, Italia in Dettaglio, and these should be on your syllabus to kind of figure out where something is in Italy. Because if you notice, when I type in just Campobello in Italy, I get a couple of different places. I get Campobello di Licata and I get Campobello di Mazzara. And one of our documents said Trapani, so I'm pretty sure it's that one. But you can go into this other website, click on the first letter of a town, and then go and kind of in alphabetical order search for names. So there's only 2 Campobellos, and they're both in Sicily. So I at least have narrowed it down to a couple different places. I do have that document that tells us it's Trapani, so I'm going to go that direction first. So I want to talk a little bit about jurisdictions. There are 20 regions in Italy and 107 provinces, and those provinces tend to change. So those change. Where your ancestor lived didn't change, and cities tend to not change as much, but about 8,000 cities and towns. And those are called comune, and they could be subdivided into what are called frazione, which are hamlets. And then the larger cities are even segmented into quarters or quartiere. And so you may have multiple areas of a larger city. So it goes region. So region would be Sicily, and then the province, Trapani. And then there's always a head city of the province. And in this case, that's also Trapani. And it's the name of the province. And then the town that we're looking for is Campobello di Mazzara. And so I will say this, the head city for each province is where the quote state archives are held. They're called state archives, but each province has a state archive. And a lot of the important records that we use in family history are transferred to that state archive, and it's a public archive where people can gain access to civil registration, to all kinds of documents related to Italian research. Language, let's talk about language. So depending on where you're at in Italy and what time period you're researching in, records could be in Italian, Latin, dialect, French, Spanish, German. lots of different languages. Primarily, you're going to find the records in Italian, especially the civil registration in Italian, the church records in Latin with some dialect thrown in there. Because Italy, when it was unified between 1859 and 1871, only 2% of the entire population spoke Italian as we know Italian today because of the city-states. In fact, there are 34 plus different dialects in Italy today. Some of them considered more a language than a dialect. And so, although everyone there speaks Italian now, you still have dialects being spoken and actively in areas. My grandparents didn't actually speak Italian, they spoke Sicilian. So when I learned things from them, I learned Sicilian, and it wasn't until I went to school that I learned Italian. But there's certain cadences that you hear, and the Sicilian dialect or the Sicilian cadence of the language is the one that I tend to gravitate more towards. So language can be different. But don't fret, there are word lists. Family Search has just an amazing amount of information that can help you with your Italian research. There's an Italian genealogical word list that comes in super handy. That's in your syllabus. There's also the Family Search Wiki. I'll make a huge plug for that because you will find document translation guides on there, information about all the different record types, links to records on Family Search, tutorials on how to read the handwriting, because that can be a struggle sometimes, research strategies, and training, lots of training videos on familysearch.org about Italian research. And so I would encourage you, if you're researching your Italians, to bookmark the wiki page. But especially, I have included in your syllabus document translation guides. And so if that's one of the things that scare you the most about doing Italian research is not understanding the language, I'm going to show you some of these records. They follow a beautiful format, thanks to Napoleon and thanks to other record keepers past Napoleon. A great format that once you learn that format, once you learn how the records are to read the handwriting and become familiar with names and dates, you are golden. So once you've identified where your ancestor lived in Italy, you've mapped it, you've got that Italian dictionary or word list handy, and you've bookmarked your Family Search wiki page, it's time to search those records. And so I'm not going to talk about all the records there are for Italy because we're just talking beginning here, but one of the very first places you want to go is civil registration. There are censuses in Italy, but they're usually by town, and the national censuses are not available to us. So the primary civil registrations are obviously birth, marriage, and death. And then Catholic parish is going to be absolutely essential beyond those civil registration, or in conjunction with the civil registration as well. So baptisms, marriage, burial, and a host of other documents. I'm going to give you a quick timeline, and this is also in your syllabus. So you do have lots of other records, like I said. Council of Trent really began that parish record keeping for us. So between 1545 and 1563 is when we have the 7th session and the 24th session of the Council of Trent that really laid out how Catholic priests were to keep parish records. And some areas were actually in Italy and in Spain were keeping parish records prior to that time. But it was really in the mid to late 1500s that you start to see these records being kept. And then in 1595, the Pope reinforces that record keeping. So civil registration in Italy begins in the early 1800s, thanks to Napoleon, and were kept consistently in most areas of Italy to the present day. And we'll talk about the different time periods. So 1866, after Italy was officially unified, becomes the records that are more standardized, the easier to read. And especially after 1875, specific forms are used from 1875 and onward. So to get started with the records, really, and just because I work for Family Search, I'm not just saying this, but really Family Search is the premier place to go to for Italian research because of what Family Search has been able to accomplish over decades and decades working with the Italian government. Filming in Italy began in about 1948 and continued up until about 10 years ago, in 2011, Family Search signed a massive agreement with the Italian government to digitize all civil registration from all of the state archives in every province of Italy, and to also go to all of the courthouses. So just a quick lesson on, you know, where the civil records are kept. You start in the town, so they're recorded on a town or city level, and then a copy is made and given to what's called a tribunale, also known as a courthouse. Those are a non-consultable copy. They're just sort of kept in that courthouse for decades, and sometimes that means the condition isn't so great. And then after 40 to 70 years, it varies in the area, they're transferred to the state archives. And so Family Search has been going over the last 10 years, especially, to all of the state archives and as many courthouses as we can to get as much of the civil registration as possible. And so we have on Family Search lots and lots of records from those state archives and courthouses. And we also, like I said, have partnered with the government. And so the website is called Portale Antenati, and that's also in your syllabus. And so the records that you'll see for birth, it's typically up to 100 years ago. For marriage and death, up to 70 years ago. Those are sort of our privacy cutoff dates. If you need more recent, then you're going to write directly to the town and ask them for that. They'll want to know how you're related, and you may not get an immediate response, so you may want to use a company or a professional researcher to get that if you have more recent documents you want to get. But honestly, a lot of what you need could very well be online. Family Search also has some Catholic parish records, and more are coming online as well. So really, you go to Family Search. So I'm going to remind you of Vito and his family, and kind of walk you through a little bit of what I would do to find his birth record. So from the records in the United States, we have a pretty good idea. We have a place and we have a birth date that's pretty consistent. Now, pretty consistent doesn't mean exactly right. I think we know that. Just because it's pretty consistent doesn't mean that we couldn't be off a year or a day or something like that. So I'm going to go to the Family Search catalog on familysearch.org, and I go under search and I click on catalog. I type in Campobello di Mazzara in Trapani, and then I get my results. And so I'm looking for the births, which are nati from 1892, and you can see there's a camera icon. So I want to click on that icon and go directly to my images. And the beautiful thing about this, now I will say that the majority of the Italian records on familysearch.org are not indexed, which means you're going to have to browse them as if you were browsing a microfilm or a digital film. That's just the reality of it. We have, like, you know, lots of people out there that are helping to index these records, but we just don't, because of the sheer mass amount of, you know, close to 200 million images that of Italian records that we have now. It's about that much that's indexed. But for civil registration and for most church records, for each year, the births, marriages, and deaths were kept, you know, in a book each year. There are usually indexes at the beginning or the end of the book, and you'll see I've kind of circled it on the screen here. That's what those index pages look like. So I would go to the index page at the back of 1892, and there I find Vito, and he is the son of Vincenzo and Angela Bascio. And they don't always give you the parents' names in the index in the back of the book. In this instance, they did. And so I'm looking for the registration number, the act number, and that's 265. So I just go back, you know, I'm at the back of the book. I go to Act 265 in that book, and I find his birth record. And this is a very standard format. We're in 1892, so forms began for Italian records, the really nice forms, after 1875. And so for birth records, you're going to get an act number, you're going to get the person's name in the margin, you'll get the date that the act was recorded, so that is not the date of birth. Then you'll get who brought the child forward. That's usually a midwife or the father. In this case, it's the father, Vincenzo. You'll get his age. You'll get the fact that he's a shoemaker or a cobbler. You'll get where he lives, not necessarily where he was born, so where he lives. And you'll get that the child was born at 8 p.m. on the 26th of the current month. So on the 26th of September, Vito kept telling us his birthday was the 25th. 25th, 26th, what's one day amongst friends? This is saying his official record is saying the 26th. And then we get we get where they were living. We get that it was on Via Margherita, so we could Google map that. We can see if that is still there. Oftentimes on these later records too, you'll get the actual address. You'll get the actual house number. And then we get his mother's name, Angela Bascio, and the fact that they are married. It says his wife, and that they live together, and she's a housewife. And then further down at the bottom, number 8, we get his name, the fact that he's a male and things like that. Now, I had sort of a date, so I just went straight for his birth record. I would also still look in the years surrounding to make sure that this is the only Vito in this particular family. I had his parents' names from his birth or from his death certificate, so I'm fairly positive that this is our guy. But I would still flush it out and look for other family members, look for his siblings and things like that in the surrounding years, just to make sure that this is our Vito and not another child named Vito. So civil registration, I'm going to kind of quickly walk you through. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. A lot of this information is in your syllabus, but I want you to kind of be aware of the different time periods and what information you could sort of find on them. So the first one is the Napoleonic time period, and this by the archives for short is SCN. So he introduced record keeping in Italy, like I said, as early as 1806, and those records were kept from 1806 to 1815. So the Papal States, they go from 1810 to 1814 in the Veneto and Lombardia area, and this is mostly northern Italy. And Piemonte, again, 1806 to that time period. The Reino di Napoli is the very southern portion, but this excludes Sicily at that time. So there are certain areas where these earlier records were just not kept. However, okay, let me just actually talk to this a little bit. This is sort of what they look like. So you can see that there are some forms, but this is where Napoleon set forth the sort of order of things. So you have an act number, then the date that the act was recorded, the name of the person declaring a child was being born, that gender, the name of the mother, their birth date, witnesses, the name of the child, and that's sort of the way that the records go. And you can see marriage and death and the information that's also as well. Then we have what's called the Restoration period. So Napoleon's no longer in power, but in southern Italy, in the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, Murat began the practice in 1809. And after he was actually he was married to Napoleon's sister. So when Napoleon was no longer in power, he was no longer in power, and the Bourbons came in 1816. They continued that record-keeping practice that Napoleon and Murat had set forth in the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, and then of course introduced the practice in 1820 in Sicily. So you get some very, very early, and they continued that practice throughout that whole time. You have next, and this is the slide that, sorry, it shows you sort of where that's at. Now, in northern Italy, they stopped keeping the records. After Napoleon left, they stopped keeping them. So you have them continue in the south, you have them stopped in the north, although in some areas in the north, parish priests did dual duty, and they copied, they had their parish records and they made a copy, a civil copy too. So in the south, there are some changes to records, because throughout Italy and throughout, this entire time period, you have this constant struggle between church and state. So Napoleon came in and kind of the Catholic Church off. And so he wanted to really make it a government thing, a civil thing. When he was no longer in power and the Bourbons started creating the records in the South, they reintroduced that element of the church and state together. And so Ferdinand the First, kingdom of the two Sicilies, he combined sort of the civil and the church record keeping practices. So for marriage records, it recorded not only the information about civil or the fact that they were civilly being recognized as married, but really that all important church, the sacrament that was performed. So what we get during this time period in the South is an act called an Act of Solemn Promise. So this was just sort of the initial step. And then banns were posted on doors, and this again comes from the Catholic Church. And then on the right side of the document is the actual marriage performed in the church. We also get what is a amazing thing for Italian research. We get sort of these marriage packets. So these marriage packets can include the copies of births of the bride and groom. They include, if any of the parents of the bride and groom were deceased, their death records. If any of the grandparents were deceased, potentially their death records, and the banns, and a whole packet is put together. These are often called allegati or processetti. I'm just going to mention them, but you can find out more about them on the Family Search Wiki and in other articles. But it's just a great thing. This is, again, a birth record from that time period. And so that column gives, on the right-hand side, gives you all of the baptismal information. The left-hand side is giving you all of the information about the civil. And so you're going to have 3 or 4 different dates on this document. So you're going to want to be able to ferret out which one is the baptismal date versus the birth date, versus the recording dates. And then Italian civil registration from present, 1866 to present. Really great records, pre-printed forms from 1875 on. That 1866 to 1874, they're all handwritten, all paragraph style, but don't be scared of those. They follow that same format that Napoleon set forth. And we start to actually get a little bit more information. You saw in that 1892 that we got, like, you know, on the birth record, we got the street name and then sometimes the number, but we get the street name and we get exact times when things were recorded, exact time of birth of the child and things like that. So lots of really amazing information that you can find on these records. Again, I'm going to mention those translation helps, and these are also in your syllabus. You can find those on the wiki. They have pre-1865 births, marriages, and deaths. So you have those helps for you as you're looking at the records. And then I will also mention that the Family History Library, although not open right now, is offering virtual consultation sessions. These are 20-minute sessions that you can sign up to talk with an expert about anywhere in the world. So even if you don't have Italian ancestry, don't know anybody with Italian ancestry, if you've got some help you need in Southern US, or help you need in German, or help you need in Romanian, or wherever, we've got an expert that you can be paired up with, and you can go out to the Family History Library virtual signups, and I can probably find that and post that in the chat afterwards or get that to you. But you can sign up for a day and a time, join a Zoom call, and get some extra help in your research. And so I wanted to really quickly show you the marriage of Vito's parents. So he was born in 1892. His dad was, 20 something, and didn't tell us his mom's age, but that's kind of an indicator, if they're in their early 20s, that they were probably married. And so I just went a year or two before and found their marriage record. And you can see that his father is from Castelvetrano, which opens up a whole nother area of research for us. But you can see that they're pretty close together. They're only about 8 kilometers from each other. And so if you find a new town, the other beautiful thing about Italian records is they're going to tell you where somebody is from. Most likely they tell you where they were living, but they also tell you where they're from. And so that takes you to another town, you can then say, okay, well, now I need to go and look for Vincenzo and Castelvetrano, but I know the Angeles family was in Campobello, and they are marrying in the parish of the bride. And that is very common in Italy, is to have them be married in that parish of the bride. Really, really quick, we're going to talk about Catholic church records, baptisms, confirmations, marriages, and burials. Latin, they're going to be in Latin. So here are your family search helps for Latin. And if you need any other ones, email me and I can help you with some other Latin helps. Latin it's not as scary as you think. If you're learning the Italian terms in your civil registration, very close, or if you've used it in other areas of research in Germany, or in Spanish research or what have you, these are really, really great guides. And I guess that's probably all I'm going to say about that. The other thing I'll say about parish records is a lot of abbreviations. And so if you're wanting a really good Italian Latin abbreviation guide, I can point you to one of those, but you're going to want to become familiar with abbreviations, because the fact is they didn't have a lot of paper and they didn't have a lot of time, and they abbreviated a lot of things. You're going to find that in notarial records and in parish records. So baptismal records, typically you'll get the date of baptism. Place of birth is inferred from where you're looking at. The child's names, the mother and father's names, and the names of godparents. That's a typical baptismal record. Confirmations were administered by the bishop. And I will say this, parish records are held at the parishes. After 1901, parish priests were required to create a copy and send those to the diocese. And so after that time period, you will find things at the diocesan archive. However, before that, parish records are still at the parish, and these are private archives. These confirmations would be at the diocese because they were administered by a bishop. So generally children between the ages of 8 to 12, and they could include the name of the father and ages. So those are good little censuses. So I want to talk a little bit about marriage. I mentioned some of the typical patterns or atypical pattern about banns. Marriage is usually in the parish of the bride. Banns are posted in both places. 3 are read. The median ages for Italians in the 1800s is actually a little bit older than what people think. Will you find people being married before that? Yes. Brides and grooms tended to find their mate in their home parish or within 10 kilometers, so really, really close. But that also could depend on whether or not they're in an isolated town versus a seaport, or a large city versus a smaller town or something like that. But those are sort of some typical patterns that you'll see. And this is what a marriage document might look like. You get the date of the marriage, the date of the banns, the name of bride and groom, the birthplace or residence, the name of the parents, and occasionally the maiden name of the mother. You do not always get the maiden name of the mother, and then names of witnesses. So this is sort of a typical thing that you'll see with that. And then death and burial. So these are the records that you will get probably the least information about. But what you will get is generally where they were buried, and this is typically dependent on rank and status in Italy, and oftentimes you will get things like ossuaries and things like that, and graves were repurposed in Italy, so you have to pay for a family plot for 70 years or something like that. But then you will get buried over, or bones removed and put somewhere else, because of just space. So a typical death or burial record is going to give you that burial date, not always the death date, the place of burial, and the name of the deceased. And it could include deceased parents, former spouse, and then of course the indication of last rites received. And here's an example of that. But I want to just end really quickly by saying the true treasure is in finding your family. And these are some pictures of my family. And I hope that if you have Italian ancestors, or if you're helping somebody with Italian ancestry, that you will find just lots of treasure. These documents are amazing, but that you'll also be able to put context and life and story to them as well, to be able to really understand who they were and where they came from. And then lastly, I want to just share with you all, because I work for FamilySearch.org, Family Search typically puts on Roots Tech in person in Salt Lake City in February. However, because of the pandemic, we're doing it online. It's all virtual, all free. We have hundreds of classes that will be offered. These will be 20-minute sessions streamed live on YouTube, and that's February 25th through the 27th. Again, all virtual, all free. Current numbers show something close to 300,000 people have signed up. We will have, and in over 200 countries. We'll also have all of the English sessions in translated into 11 languages, but they're quite honestly classes in about 40 different languages, but it spans the globe. So if you have an interest in almost any area of the world, chances are that there's a class or an expert for you. We've been able to get people who live in country to offer classes not only in their native language, but also in English. And so it's just kind of going to be an amazing thing. And we hope that you'll join us. So if you go to rootstech.org, you can sign up and be notified of when the conference goes live. All of those videos will be live for up to a year after the conference as well. And it'll all be on YouTube, so you can access it any day or time that you choose to. But we'll have 12 different keynotes, and we'll be streaming 24 hours a day for the conference, for the entire conference. So there'll be lots of live things that they'll be happening to, in addition to all of the classes that are offered. And so thank you so much for having me today. I hope that that's helped you a little bit with your research, or with somebody that you know that has Italian family history. Thanks. And I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Suzanne. There are 8 questions in the question box. Can you see them, or would you like me to read them to you?
Can you read them to me? Would that be okay?
That would be fine.
Okay.
Carlene wants to know whether an ancestor would have alien registration if they came to the United States prior to World War II.
They potentially could, if they did not naturalize and they came to the United States prior to World War II. Those alien registration forms were between 1940 and 1944. So the National Archives in Kansas City has, for the western area, has a huge majority of those that were transferred from USCIS, I think in 2012. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but on Ancestry and through the NARA catalog, you can actually do a name search for your person to see if they have anything related to an AR2 form or an A file. And so those were transferred to Kansas, and they are happy to pull that. And I think it's maybe $20 or something like that you can get those forms and files.
Mark wants to know, how and where can I find out from what region Italians settled in certain cities and states in the United States? Example, Sicilians were major settlers in Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm looking at a bookshelf in front of me. I kind of collect these Italians in Boston, Italians in Philadelphia. Italians did generally settle together in enclaves, and so mine settled in St. Louis, and then they moved to San Pedro, California. But you can generally tell where somebody's from, also by where they lived. So I would say there's a lot of really great books and studies done. So if you're talking, if you have ancestors who are in Philadelphia, I would contact the local historical society. If there's a local Italian society, somebody local that could point you to books, or do a search on WorldCat to see Philadelphia Italians or whatever. And those books will kind of give you some indications or some clues of where people came from. I hope that helped or answered it.
Karen wants to know a little bit more about passenger lists. Where can we find them and how to search for them?
Okay, so passenger lists, they are just everywhere these days, but you can a lot of the passenger lists that are coming into the United States are on Ancestry and on FamilySearch.org. You also have EllisIsland.org or Castle Garden, And so those are probably the 4 main sites that I would go to look, and I would use all of them. I am no respecter of persons when it comes to indexes, because some indexes are better than others on different sites. Some search capabilities are different, but you're going to want to go to one of those sites, Ancestry, Family Search, Ellis Island, and make a search for your ancestor there. There are some older books that were done by the Balsh Institute on Italians to America. You may have heard that. Those are, I think, online too, on Family Search and other websites. But you can always go back to those books and look, in alphabetical order and things like that. But they're readily available on websites.
Amy would like you to briefly describe a ban.
Oh, a ban. Okay, so if you know a lot about Catholic research, those are the, they were required to. Okay, do you want me to go all the way back to the Council of Trent? How much time do we have? So in the 24th session of the Council of Trent, that's really the session that's all about marriages. And so like the bans, the civil bans that you see and the Catholic Church bans that you see all kind of hail back to that, because what they were trying to stop, they were trying to see, this is a nutshell version of it, sorry, but they were trying to make sure that the sacraments were performed in a correct way and stave off clandestine marriages. So they didn't want people to be able to just steal somebody and go get married in another parish. And so these bans were to be posted in the bride's parish and the groom's parish. They went through a whole host of questions. Are you marrying of your own free will and choice, and all sorts of things. And so this was meant to say, this is not a clandestine marriage. It was posted also to determine whether or not there was an impediment to the marriage, and an impediment could have been things like somebody was previously betrothed, someone had previously taken a vow of chastity, someone was too closely related by blood or by affinity. And so these were posted in the, just a so-and-so is marrying so-and-so. And they were even read in the church to say these people are getting married. Anybody opposed? And so this hails back to, that Catholic practice, and it's carried over into the civil tradition. Hope that made some sense. At Roots Tech, I'm doing a 20-minute presentation on using on marriage supplements and dispensations, and that spans the whole entire Catholic Church, and of course carries over into civil. I hope that was like the nutshell. That was like probably not a really. Anyway.
Carlene wants to know about the common practice of taking pictures of the deceased in their caskets. They found a picture of her great grandmother. We think she died after World War I.
Yeah, I don't personally have a lot of that, but I have heard of people doing that, and I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if that's an Italian thing, but I haven't seen it as an Italian thing. But I know that there are some cultures that do that. That's a way of remembering the dead is to take a picture in the casket. Yeah.
What about Cecily, who wants to know about her maternal and paternal sides were for the same commune, same parish in Liguria near Genoa. Most family members were in Cleveland by 1872. How do I find out more about them? She had a great-grandfather who purchased land in Cleveland in 1873. We know he was here in 1870, but where else should I look?
Okay, so so they know they were from Genoa area, or not exactly sure where in Genoa?
Same parish in Liguria near Genoa.
Oh, so they know the parish, the town. Family Search has a lot for that area online. If you're looking in the city, there are some for the major cities in Italy. We have indexes that are it's not searchable indexes, but you're going to want to go to the Family History Library catalog and just kind of see type in the name of that parish and see what's available online.
Carol has a maternal grandmother who she is having difficulty finding. The marriage records indicate that her mother was unknown. We've not been able to find her birth record. What do you suggest?
Okay, so what time period?
She doesn't identify.
Okay. Maybe email me with a little bit more specifics, but if a parent, and you'll find this, if a parent's unknown, that's a little bit more difficult. There are orphanage records in Italy, but the parents are not always identified. There was a lot of infant abandonment in Italy, and they had what was called the wheel, or la rota. And so a child could literally just be placed in this wheel at the convent or the parish, and then they were sort of wheeled into the convent, and then you could ring a bell, and then the nuns would just take the child, and they would record, where what they were wearing and things like that. But oftentimes, if it says unknown, if we're talking about it on a US record, I'm not as surprised. But if it's on an Italian record and it says unknown, then that's a little bit more difficult. Not impossible, but you'd have to trace the person across their life to see sort of where they grew up, and you may even need to use some DNA. But I won't. Yeah. Sorry.
Anne has a great uncle who came over in 1900, and he has 4 middle names when he came over. Will they put his full name or parts of his name on records? And I actually have the same thing. My grandfather had 4 names.
Yeah.
How do you?
So generally on the civil records, you'll see, like, on the birth record, you'll see all of the names, or even in more often on parish records, they'll be given more names. But on civil records, yeah, if that was a family tradition, you will see on the birth record, you'll usually see all 4 names. Now, whether or not they're known by all 4 names throughout their life, probably not. So the fact that you know that from him coming over is kind of a little bit rare. But yeah, I would search for him under all the names in the records in Italy. Yeah.
Okay, Cecily has a great grandfather who was a foundling, and she received his foundling records from the hospital in Genoa.
Okay.
She also has his military records from 1861 to 65,
That's
and she
amazing.
wants to know a lot more about him. Any suggestions?
So which military records did she have? The Lista di Leva, or do you have his entire file?
She did not specify.
Okay. Because if you just have his military draft, the Lista di Leva, then you can go to the state archives and see whether or not they have his entire file. There are other military records in Rome as well, and it depends on if he was an officer or not, but you could potentially find additional information that way. Yeah, that I would have to know a little bit more detail to kind of point you in the right direction, but that's amazing. That's great that you've got the military records.
Helen wants to know about topics being presented at Roots Tech and what times.
Okay, so there really are no specific times because the conference will just go live with all of the classes. And so there'll be a navigation experience where you'll be able to choose a locality, time frame, a speaker or whatever, and then sort of be directed to other content that you're interested in. You'll also be able to kind of create your own playlist. So you can, you look at a class that looks interesting to you, click on the side of it, and it'll sort of be added to your playlist so that you have just a running total of all the classes or things that you're interested in. But in terms of like the live happenings, those will just come up on the front page of rootstech.org when the conference goes live. So you'll be able to see which keynotes are live now and that sort of thing, and all the keynotes and everything will be viewable afterwards. So you can create your own playlist if you're not able to join live. Does that help?
Yep. Dennis wants to know about heavy immigration from the province of Messia in Tuscany. Is there a particular reason for this area having a greater immigration than other provinces in the north?
Mm. I don't know specifically about that province, but that's not uncommon where you'd find, something happened in that area, or there's sort of that chain migration. Were they going to the US or to Europe? Because there you will find that with certain towns that family members will go to one area and kind of set up shop, and then they'll invite other family members to come and go there and work and things like that. And so my suggestion would be to look in the Family Search book section or on Family Search to see if there are any historical books about that area, and then look on WorldCat, because and your books are going to be in Italian, but you can find local books on that area. The other thing you might want to try is for that town, or specifically for the town, go to that town's website, and you can just Google Comune di and then the name of the town, and look at the historical section. Maybe go to the library in that area and try to contact, sometimes on the town websites they'll have a link to their library, and then try to really find a local history, and that may tell you a little bit more why. Or oftentimes a lot of these towns have Facebook pages now. I'm connected with my Trapeto Sicily Facebook page. You could even contact someone who's local and say, who's the local historian that could kind of help me figure out why this could have been happening. But I'll tell you, there's a book for my town in Trapeto, and Trapeto is literally like 3,000 people where everybody's related. And there was a book written about the migration from Trapeto to Germany and Trapeto to San Pedro, California. So I know all of the stories about why and when people left, and it's a local history that's written by a local. So that would be my suggestion.
Sandy wants to know a little bit more about marriage. What is considered too closely related in Italy?
Fourth degree of consanguinity or affinity. So that would be second great grandparents. So 4 degrees back. That would be too close. So anybody who is more closely related than that is going to have a dispensation by the bishop.
Elena says her grandmother was raised in a convent. Are there records for these convents?
Yes, convent US, convent Italy.
I would kind of bet Italy.
Yeah, and you're going to want to go to the diocese, or if that convent is still active, go to either the convent or the diocese. It won't be on a local parish level.
Antonia says her great-grandfather traveled to Pittsburgh area to work in the late 1800s. They returned home to Molinesque several times and returned back to the United States and were eventually killed in a coal mine accident here. But I know nothing else about them. Are there likely to be records here or in Italy?
Both.
That's what I would say as well.
Yes, both. And in fact, this is something that I didn't mention about civil registration because it gets a little bit more than beginner. But you have your regular civil registration books for births 1892, 1893, 1894, so on. And then you have a second part of the book. It's called Parte Due. And I talk a little bit about this in one of my classes at Roots Tech, one of my 20 minutes. But these Part 2 books detail anyone who was born, married, or died outside of the town, and if they were still a citizen of that town, and where your people kept going back and forth. You might find some information in those Part 2 books about people being born or died in Pittsburgh, and it's recorded in Italy. So you will find those in those Part 2 books. The other thing that I would say is Catholic community records, fraternal societies, especially for Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania. Order Sons of Italy was one of the oldest fraternal organizations. Lots of Italians, when they came to the US, joined fraternal organizations. So if there's a local fraternal organization, you may find information about your Italians in the US. Ancestor.com has some of the Osaya records online. What else? Newspapers. newspapers in the US, especially ethnic newspapers in the US, they're likely not online, but you can find an Italian language newspaper, especially for larger cities, San Francisco, St. Louis, Pittsburgh, you know what I mean? You'll find them in Italian, and you're going to find more information in those than you will in the English language newspapers. I would say that's a good way, especially when you have an accident like that, to kind of get a little bit more information. Italian newspapers, we're lucky in the US. They record all the little things that happened. Italian newspapers, European newspapers tend to be the big, broad, sweeping things. So you're not going to find a lot. And we just have a culture here in the US of early newspapers and sort of free press. But I'm babbling on now. But those are kind of my thoughts on that. Yeah.
Thank you, Suzanne. It's been such a joy to listen to you and get a few hints and helps on doing Italian research. I think with the large percentage of Americans that are related to Italians, it always comes in handy to have new nuggets of information. So thank you for your presentation and your time.
No problem. And at Roots Tech, I have 3 classes on Italian, one on civil, one on beginning, one on church, and then of course the one that's on dispensations and impediments to marriage. So you're welcome.
In the chat session, there is notes for Suzanne's presentation, and is your contact information on the notes, I would assume?
Yeah, it should be on there, suzanne.adams@familysearch.org. I can't promise that I will get back to you until after Roots Tech though, unless it's a super easy question. I'm actually gonna, it's Saturday, but I actually got some stuff that I need to do for work today because we are trying to do all the back end to get that conference ready.
Ray says a big grazie.
Grazie.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay.